Hello and welcome. I'm going to be talking about the shadow work in particular, and the barriers to do shadow work. First, I've also recorded a video on YouTube. I will leave a link here for you to follow through to a video that I recorded on shadow work, what shadow work is, what the shadow is. But specifically in this video, I would like to address the barriers of shadow work and what happens when you go into your unconscious self. Now, shadow work, well, the shadow, of course, was coined by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. And shadow work is a practice that we can all do at any time to look deeper within ourselves. Now, this work does require being very open-minded and being very open to looking at ourselves differently, without judgment, without criticism, and being open to explore our deeper selves. And if it wasn't for shadow work or understanding my unconscious, working with my shadows and understanding what the shadow is, my life would have been completely different. The way to your light, the way to who you truly are, is by going into your shadow. You have to, and I know I've said this many times before, it is a must. It is a must that we go into our shadow and our unconscious self. We will not be able to change our patterns, our false beliefs, and our reality unless we go through this part of ourselves. Period. Now, there are many ways for healing. There are many ways for understanding ourselves. I mentioned this in many videos, tried many different modalities, many different techniques and therapies, etc., and they're all fine and they're all good. And I'm not saying that this is the only way that's going to get you to where you want to go, but you definitely have, and I feel that a lot of the other modalities and therapies do have a bit of a flavor of going into our deeper self or darker self, because we have to understand in some way where this darkness is coming from. Where is our pain and our suffering coming from? Where are our broken relationships coming from? Where are our patterns coming from? And the only way that we can identify this and heal ourselves, and I'm talking about healing our bodies, healing our relationships, our emotional stuff, the relationship with ourselves, and then of course other relationships, and bring in meaningful relationships, heal trust within ourselves and within the universe, connect more with our authenticity and who we truly are, is by going through the darkness in some form or another. So shadow work doesn't really have a particular structure to it per se. It is more of an exercise that you can incorporate into your practice to understand your patterns, your emotions, the attachments, the pain, the false beliefs, and some of the things that are said, some of the things that are thought unconsciously. So the shadow is basically a part of ourself that we tend to repress, we tend to ignore, we tend to hide. We can definitely tend to not even want to look at it. Now, those who are very dominant in their unconscious, and I say it, operating very unconsciously, will have a very difficult time understanding this, because it takes a whole new perspective to look at ourselves in a different way, in a way of breaking through the unconscious. It is one thing, understanding it is the other thing, is the other aspect of implementing it and working with it consciously. It is not for everyone, of course, but I do know in my heart of hearts that if we all went through this exercise in some form or another, we would drastically change our lives, period. I've seen people, and myself included, who've had awakenings and aha moments and serious shifts of reality and physicality and emotional well-being through this work, through opening up a new understanding within self, right? There is, as I mentioned, a huge percentage demographic of people on this planet who will never do this work, who will never go into their unconscious, and who will probably be perpetuating unconscious patterns for the end of their time. This is part of the way that we've been. This is part of our society. So there are a few of us that are starting to wake up, that are starting to become aware and doing this work. And it takes a very, very brave person. So if you are doing this work, if you feel called to do this work, then you are signing up for incredible, incredible change. You are signing up to take ownership of your life, of your reality. When we do this, it is basically a stance. We are declaring that we want change, that we want something better, that we want to improve our lives, that we want to return to our power and be whole and all that we can be. And I'll tell you this from my experience, I never knew how good it could be. I had no idea. But I was in such a bad place when I started this process that all I knew is that I wanted to be better. I didn't want to be in where I was because it was horrible. It was killing me slowly. And I was done. I was done with where the patterns that I was living in, the life that I was living in, the perpetual challenges and difficulties that I was constantly living in. I was done. I was done. Every aspect of myself was throwing in the towel and just saying, I am done with this life. But I didn't know when I said I was done, I also didn't know what was coming next. So we have to, I feel in some way also, maybe bottom out, maybe hit those points in our lives where we have no choice but to make changes. Unfortunately, some people won't be making changes, and that is their path, that is their story in their life. We all have our different path and our different way of living. So if again you feel called to this work, and if you are in a stage where you want change, or maybe you're already going through this shadow is your way through it, period. You have to go through it in order to understand it, in order to see it, and in order to create something better, in order to resolve it. So the shadow is a part of ourselves that develops from formative years. It is comprised of our repressed and suppressed fears and shame and false beliefs that we have within our psyche, within our unconscious self. These unconscious aspects, these shadowy aspects of ourselves can be a driving force of unconscious behaviors. And the reality that we live by within our shadow feels real. And we can justify our actions of projecting our anger or pointing our finger at certain people or living a certain unhealthy lifestyle. It will feel real. It will feel normal. It will feel as if it's justified in some kind of way. And so when we are living in that cycle, we are very much perpetuated by our shadow self. Now, the shadow also does have a collective aspect to it as well. I've mentioned this before in other videos, which is the collective shadow of like attracts like, essentially. Now, this can come in through the collective unconscious. This could be a group event where we may find ourselves mingling and creating relationships with like-minded people who have a same, you can even consider it as the same vibrational frequency, but it also can be same belief system or same behavioral patterns. However you want to look at it, like attracts like, and we can feel safer and more justified around certain people and events that support our way of being and support our way of feeling and functioning, meaning that when we are in our shadow, if we are in perpetual states of judgmentalness, criticism, anger, resentment, we will tend to find relationship patterns that will support the way that we feel. If it is through almost a person who will trigger that within ourselves constantly, or someone who will basically be almost a bit of a support or a shoulder to lean on, or someone who will share similar stories that will feel very familiar. So the interactions can come in as a very compatible type of relationship or a very toxic relationship that will keep perpetuating these underlying shadow aspects that have not been looked at, and create eventually serious health issues, emotional issues, psychological issues, because everything is connected. So when we are in these perpetual states unconsciously, our psyche becomes affected, our psychology becomes affected, our emotional self becomes affected, and our physical self becomes affected. And then our soul self, our spiritual self becomes very suppressed and almost not active. So when we are suppressing our true soul's potential, we are basically cutting off a stream or an avenue to our self. it's almost like cutting off an arm or cutting off a leg. We're not fully allowing part of ourself to thrive the way that it's meant to, the way that it can. And again, as I've gone through this process, I now realize how powerful this is and how important it is to understand our shadow and to understand the unconscious. And that's why I specialize in it. And that's why I keep talking about it. And I'm going to keep talking about it because it is one of the more important aspects that we need to look at, that we need to pay attention to. And when we are engaged with our shadow, or when the shadow is engaged with us, it's very, very important to not put pressure and strain on ourselves, meaning being very hard on ourselves, judging ourselves, criticizing ourselves, feeling ashamed with our actions and behaviors. This is a moment that we have here in our lifetime to find the deeper meaning and the origin and the source of where these feelings are coming from. If we feel ashamed, if we feel, if we're hard on ourselves, if we are pointing the critical finger towards ourselves, towards our inner self, or towards other people. And so when we catch ourselves in these unconscious behaviors, a trigger response, anger, a response to a certain event or a person, it is the most optimal time to drop into this work and to see where it is coming from. What am I really angry at? Where is that anger coming from? And how can I find peace? How can I reverse the feelings or reverse the false beliefs that attach to it and find peace in this moment with myself, with other people, and with my life or life itself, right? And there are many layers to this. I have seen changes occur within my entire life. And I'm talking about relationships. I'm talking about my sense of self. I'm talking about my perceptions and being able to navigate very challenging situations with ease. Being able to rise above very toxic and unhealthy dynamics in my outer reality with ease, by not getting affected by it, by not getting affected by other people, by not getting affected by life. When you are able to rise above, when you are able to find peace in challenging moments and look at situations and look at people in new perspectives, you have arrived, or at least you're definitely in the process of it. And so we can lose our energy, we can lose ourselves, and we can lose so much of ourselves in conflict, in relationship dynamics, with life itself, and it all happens in here. It all happens in our mind, it all happens in our heart, and we become very attached, or we lose ourselves, we give our energy away to many different situations. And that is habitual. That comes from our unconscious. There are reasons for that perpetuate these cycles, or there are reasons for that happening. And we can change it all. We can change this all. So the barriers for shadow, actually, first I'm going to go into what happens when we go into our unconscious. So what happens when we go into our unconscious is we are starting to crack open the barrier between our conscious and our unconscious self. So our conscious level of awareness is the perception that we have based on rational thought, based on analysis, based on logic. What we can see, what we can make sense of, what is maybe more tangible, what is obvious, what we can base evidence on, right? So it gives us the clarity and the understanding that we need to make sense of something. And we can get very comfortable in this way of functioning. We can become very comfortable in this way of being because it makes sense and we're used to functioning this way. This is how we've been raised. This is the byproduct of society. This is how the majority of humanity functions. Now, when we start to dip into our unconscious, and I also do want to venture back into 2020. Now, I did a little tiny TikTok video on this. I will also mention it here in more detail because this is quite interesting what happened in 2020. Now, I'm sure you are fully aware of what is happening. If you are here listening to my channel, then you are very much aware of what has been going on over the last 4 years. And so in 2020, first of all, I will go into numerology first, just a very light overview. The 2s in numerology are the most intuitive numbers. So the 11 master number, yes, but 2 is very intuitive. It is very sensitive. It is related to the moon. It is also related to the mother archetype, the more feminine archetype. And the feminine archetype relates to our intuition. So a very strong intuitive archetype, very much of service, very nurturing, very compassionate, very empathetic. So what happens when twos come together is kind of an extra dose of that. Yes, it does equal a master number, but it just is the year 2020. You have two twos, you have two zeros. And the zeros basically amplify and support the true essence of the number itself. So if it is a 1 to 9, if there's a 0 with it, the 0 is basically going to amplify it. It's going to give it that much more power, and it's going to even give it more purity. So in 2020, this is from a numerology standpoint, but it also does tie into what exactly happens. So we have double twos and double zeros. So it's a very strong amplification of the essence of two. So the two, and also two, I should say that twos in consecutive order. So if you see 222, it also does represent relationships. It does represent things coming together. And it can represent, of course, a very strong, intuitive, emotional sense of self. In 2020, there was, of course, we all know what happened in 2020, but what happened within some of us is we became more sensitive and attuned to what was happening. So the more sensitive people became that much more sensitive under this influence of the twos and the zeros, and started to see things a bit differently. Now, when we start to see things differently, meaning our reality, meaning the world, relationships, dynamics, even ourself, our relationship with the world, there tends to be a fragmentation that happens. There's a split because we're fragmenting what we have been used to, how we've been used to functioning, how we've been used to seeing reality, and how we've been used to the cycles that we're used to living within. So our perpetual unconscious cycles, right? When the fragmentation occurs between our unconscious and conscious self, thus also resulting in a fracture of reality, the splintering, this fragmentation can shatter our reality and also create a great disturbance within ourselves. Now, this is one of the more, I would feel, deterrents from doing this work. This will probably, right there at that moment of fragmentation, could for one, attract people into this work, or it could deter people from this work. There are many barriers to do shadow work and to go into the unconscious, which I'll get to in a moment. But this fracturing or splintering, if you will, that happens when we start to look at our reality differently, when we start to question our reality, will create a ripple effect that will change ourselves. And that ripple effect will bring up a lot of our shadow aspects. That ripple effect will bring up unresolved emotions and buried traumas and difficulties from within our deeper self, within our psyche, within our energetic self. And so there will naturally be a purge. So many of you could have gone through dark night of the soul. That's what happened to myself. I also did start to look at reality a lot differently. Now, there are many other factors for what could have happened and how you may have experienced it, because we are all on different timelines. We all have a different soul blueprint, if you will. We all have a different path. But what happens, and this is, I feel, a common theme that most likely will happen when entering our shadow or entering our unconscious, when we haven't looked at it before and when we haven't entered it before, there will be a period of fragmentation and splintering. And this is where things become a bit shattered and a bit fragmented. And during this process, we may lose ourselves. But we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves. We have to lose our old self. We have to dismantle our old self in order to find our true self. It is a massive unfolding, because you have to also consider we are unraveling what has felt familiar, what has felt safe, our ego identity, our personas, the structures and ways of being that we have formed throughout our entire life. And if you want to really get into it, yes, past life as well. So there is a huge, huge unraveling, and it can deter people. It can turn people away, and it can prevent people from really going into the depths, from really diving into the shadow, from really diving into the unconscious. So I also have to mention, this is not work that needs to be done every day by any means. This is not about being paranoid about our behavior or about being, again, very critical towards ourselves. This is through simple observation. It is a very windy. There was an amazing psychologist who came on my podcast in the past who referenced this as being the path of the serpent, that it is a windy path. It is not a straight linear line by any means. Some days are going to be amazing. Some days are going to be really difficult. And every challenge that comes up, every trigger moment, every challenging relationship dynamic that shows up is an opportune time for doing this deeper work. In fact, when you're cruising through life, if you are feeling good, if things are okay, then enjoy it. Enjoy it as much as you can. And then as soon as a trigger happens, as soon as there is something uncomfortable that shows up within yourself, then that is the opportune time for this work. That is when you want to look within. That is when you want to feel into your emotions. That is when you want to understand the origin of your feelings, knowing that it's not the people around you. They are actors on your stage. This is your life and your show. They are activating something within yourself that once it is seen and once it is understood, you will begin to let it go. And it will continue to dissipate and dissolve over time, and you will find more peace and you will find more understanding and you will become more enlightened because of this work, because you are opening up new levels of consciousness. You are opening up greater levels of consciousness. You are going to be more self-aware. You're going to be more universally aware. You're going to be more attuned with the dimensions within yourself and, of course, the dimensions of life. And so by going through this work is going to give endless results and opportunity for growth and for evolution in every area. And of course, if you caught my other last podcast, you will heal your body on top of it. Everything is connected. Everything is changeable. And the access point to this work and to healing is the shadow. It's the unconscious self. It's the false beliefs that are within ourselves. So the greatest barrier that will happen, that happens with the majority of humanity, and I feel for my journey, it just lined up perfectly. I don't feel that I was necessarily looking for this work. It found me. So it's a bit of a funny process. You know, some people are going to be called to this. Some people will never, ever, ever look for it, want it, touch it. They will remain in their patterns, and that's their path. So again, it's not for everyone. You have to want change, you have to look for it, and you have to be open for it. And yes, it will find you. The right person might show up on your path. You may be attracted to a certain book. You may be drawn to a certain video. You may have found me for some reason, so it will find you and you will find it at the right time. There is such a thing as divine timing, and my ego didn't believe that for the longest time. There is such a thing as divine timing. If you are listening to your heart, if you are tuning in, and if you are becoming more self-aware, then it will line up for you, right? And there is a requirement of trust with this work and within ourselves. So it's something I've had to learn the hard way. I have met others who do this work, who understand this work, but then don't put it into practice. So it is one thing knowing this work, understanding our unconscious, understanding our patterns, but then the other is putting it into practice and becoming self-aware, going inward and becoming self-aware about our own actions, our own patterns, because we can change ourselves. Yes, you may need to work with someone, or maybe again, watch videos, read a book, get some guidance, maybe one-on-one, to open up avenues for yourself to see yourself in a new perspective, or to understand how to find the origin, because it can become very convoluted and very abstract to understand how it works within ourselves. But when you start to grasp it, you will naturally know where to go within yourself and how to work through it. We all have this ability. We all have this ability to be self-healers, to be our own guru, to understand our deeper selves. We don't necessarily need, and I've talked about this in my last video as well about the belief system. I never, ever, ever want to work with people, yes, for short periods of time, but I want to impart this information, this wisdom, this knowledge onto everyone so that everyone can become self-healers and their own gurus and their own guides and develop such great self-awareness that they can catch these patterns and go within themselves and immediately fix it by understanding themselves and understanding the origin. And as I mentioned in my other podcast about the belief system, if I would have had someone do this for me, or completely, I did have an amazing teacher, and she's now a friend, mentor, healer. But the most I gained, the most wisdom that I gained and self-awareness that I gained was by going within myself, was by doing this work within myself. And it's taken time. It's taken years to unravel and to understand it. And I have had a very, very, very heavy path. I've had a very dark path. I've had a very challenging path, but I know why now. And it has given me the opportunity to understand how this works and how we can all get out of it, how we can change our life, how we can shift our reality, how we can gain greater self-awareness, how we can heal our body, how we can heal relationships, how we can have an amazing, amazing life. We can all have this. And it is happening now more and more faster and faster as I'm now coming out of the tail end of it. But it has taken a lot of self-work, being very, very, very aware of myself. And it's been hard. There have been times where I've wanted to give up, throw in the towel. I just want to have fun. I just want to live my life. And I get it for all of you out there who are going through this path, but I will tell you, it does get better. It does. And it is so worth it. It is so incredibly worth it. So as I mentioned, it's one thing being aware of our shadow. It's one thing being aware of our unconscious. It's another thing putting the work into practice to develop greater self-awareness, really tuning in with ourselves, not through ego and not through our mind, but through our senses. And it requires a whole different way of being. We can opt our ego, our conscious, rational mind will want to take over this experience, meaning the ego, I'm referring to the ego that has been created from our fear, from our shame, from our false beliefs. The old patterns that we have that want us to go back into what has felt familiar. It does take a lot of conscious work, but the more conscious work that you can invest into yourself by reflecting within, by being aware of our stress, our pressure, our addictions, our patterns, our self-sabotage, our fears, by observing and feeling and sensing and letting go and not giving into those stressors and negativity and chaos, then we will become detached more and more from the entanglements of those false beliefs and those experiences and the way of being and the habitual patterns that are at the origin of these experiences within ourselves. So we can let go of everything. It is an untangling, a process of untangling, of unraveling. It is quite deep, but very worth it. Okay, so like I said, going into our unconscious. So I should preface, actually, what is shadow work? So shadow work, the whole point of this podcast and video, the whole point of shadow work is to understand our patterns, our unconscious behaviors, our anger, our sadness, maybe even feeling like we can't get ahead, feeling maybe dropping into a bit of the victim state. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with feeling this. There's nothing wrong, because through those feelings and through those difficulties, that's where your answer lies. That's where you're able to find the origin. That's where you're able to see yourself more through compassion and through curiosity. Once we see it and once we feel into it and understand the origin of the pattern and where it really is coming from, most often our upbringing, our family life, then we get to let it go. We get to let it go. Once we see it, we release it, and then we integrate it, and then we change. So it is a bit of a process of identifying the patterns, identifying the behaviors, identifying the emotions, identifying the feelings, the sensations, identifying our mindset, what we're saying outwardly, what we were saying to ourselves, the thoughts ruminating, identifying our stress, where that really is coming from, what we're holding on to, and what we're afraid of. And so we dissect it, we go into the layers of these difficult aspects within ourselves that comes in unconsciously and perpetuates these intense experiences that we feel that we have no control over. But over time, we can control it. And I don't mean it in a controlling way. It is by witnessing it, understanding it, going into it, and then integrating. And integrating is the process of once we have... Sorry, I'm outside and there's an animal not far from where I'm at. So it could be either a bear or an elk, and I'll let you know if I find out. So I'm just keeping I was listening over there and then I just needed to look. Okay, where was I? So shadow work can be done through journaling, meditation. Best to journal to find the layers within of what is plaguing you the most, what is stressing you out the most, what is creating the most anxiety and fear and worry, or what is affecting maybe some psychological aspects or emotional aspects within yourself, and how can you identify the origin? We can unravel from everything. And I'm going to get into more videos about some of the other experiences that I've gone through on a psychological level. But we can alter our brain chemistry, we can alter our functioning, we can alter the way that we see and perceive our reality. So it does require to have an open mind. It does require to let go of everything you've known and to look at things from a fresh and new perspective. And when we start to remove ourselves from being entangled and directly infused into these emotional difficulties in the shadow, when we can look at it from a different perspective, maybe from a bit of a higher viewpoint, then we see our life differently, and we're able to observe and we're able to locate the origin belief and the origin memory or experience from our past that is affecting our present. And the presence, I have to say, just as a side note, being in the present moment is where the change happens. The change does not happen if we are stressed about our future. The change doesn't happen if we want something now and we're getting angry at the process. The change happens when we are in the present moment right now, and we can feel and we can sense and we can change and we can adapt and we can manifest right in this present moment. Because in the present moment is where we get to find our peace. It is where we get to find our challenges within ourselves, to understand the origin. We can become very perpetually, again, unconsciously influenced by these shadowy aspects or these false beliefs, which are kind of the same thing. And we can perpetuate into the stress and the pressure and the worry and the grief and the sadness and the fear and the shame, and over and over and over again, and become very comfortable and consumed by this way of being and by these emotions. And it does take a great deal of self-awareness to identify it, to feel it, to sit with it, and to let it go. And to understand the origin. Where is it really coming from? What am I really afraid of? What am I really afraid of losing when I've lost everything and I know I can get by, I know I can I know I'm fine, and I know I will thrive. Why am I afraid? Why am I stressed? What do I really have to stress about? And I'm an internal infinite being. Why am I so stressed? This is an experience. Why am I so stressed? I have no attachments. Why am I so stressed? And if I have attachments, then I need to learn to let them go, to let go of the stress, right? So there is a lot of this fine tuning and playing around with our fears, our doubts, the shadow aspects, the origins of these false beliefs. And we can rise above all of it, but it does require us to go through it. It does require us to go right into it and to see where it is coming from, to feel into our senses, to go into the emotions, not to allow our emotions to control us unconsciously, or to fragment our reality and stress us out and pull us in 50 different directions. And that is a pattern coming from our unconscious self. And we can always bring it back into the center, into the present moment, and find that origin and not feed into these unconscious perpetuated patterns, these shadow aspects of ourselves. So shadow work takes a great deal of awareness. It requires a great deal of observation, journaling, just even self-awareness, taking time by yourself, spending time by yourself, and go within, feel sense, reflect. Look at your life through new perspectives. Rise above your situation and take that bird's eye view of what is happening. How can you see the situation from a different perspective, from a different reality? What kind of reality do you want to have, or do you want to see, or do you want to live? Who do you want to be in your future? How do you want to feel? And what kind of life do you want? And so this is all a bit of a twisty-turny type of experience, but it is the process of unraveling and creating anew based on the newfound sense of self, based on who you truly are at the source of it all, and then bringing your power into play, bringing your power into it, and regaining confidence with who you are. So going back to 2020, what happened, this splintering and fragmentation that basically perpetuated or pulled us into the dark night of the soul for many of us, pulled us into incredible turmoil and upheaval within ourselves, was the splintering. It was the splintering effect of opening up our unconscious, which we haven't done before. And when we do that, it unlocks so much. Who am I? Where am I going? What kind of life am I living? Where am I even going with myself? What kind of career do I want? And then all of a sudden, all of these traumas that are unlocked and these emotional memories that need to find their way out, the depression, the anxiety, the really intense, severe purging, if you will. And it is necessary. It is necessary. With guidance, we can get through this. And then after a certain point, we can work through this on our own. We can find the answers and the origins within ourselves, by ourselves. I feel it is definitely possible for us to become our full self, authority of self in every way. And the more awareness you develop through this work, the more aware you are going to be. You'll be able to find the solutions faster. You'll be able to create change faster. It happens faster and faster and faster when you're moving out of it. So back to the shadow work. So what is shadow work? It's based on reflection. It is based on finding the origin. It is based on self-awareness is huge. Watching yourself, of course, in certain interpersonal relationships. Relationship dynamics are the biggest teachers. They are the actors on our stage that will teach us a lot about ourselves. And just watching the behaviors, watching the emotions, understanding the senses, going into maybe addictive behavior, going into shame, going into fear, the repressed and the unconscious aspects that we do not want to see within ourselves, or that we've been burying and hiding and suppressing. And so going into it through compassion and through grace, and being very aware and mindful of ourselves, but also knowing that I also have to kind of bounce back for a second. Our society also is now, this whole cancel culture and becoming so sensitive about what we can and can't say. It's happening online, of course, what we can and can't say, things we can't talk about, things we can't say because it's so sensitive. We're going to offend someone, or we're going to, hurt someone. We have to go into this dialogue within ourselves, and not in an offensive way, but in a way where we are not holding back or blocking ourselves from looking at an aspect of ourselves that might be uncomfortable. And I'm talking about shame. I'm talking about fear. I'm talking about guilt. I'm talking about grief. I'm talking about these aspects within ourselves that we can easily disassociate from, we can easily suppress. And even in society, it's becoming so sterilized. We're not allowed to talk about certain things. And I get it. Some things are, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the violent or the extreme things. I'm talking about the things that will allow us to see more about ourselves, the meaningful conversation, the conversations that we have to understand more about our deeper self. And so we've become so accustomed to feeling ashamed if we act a certain way, or if we're being a certain way. And in our unconscious, and this comes from history, I've talked about it many times before, we can unconsciously create such a thick barrier to this work, where we will maybe, I've seen this in people before, I've seen it happen, where others will feel that they know what shadow work is, they know what the unconscious is, they know what the belief system is, they know all this, everything I'm talking about. But when it comes to actual self-awareness and going within self to make the change happen, not there. And why it's not there and why it's not happening is because there's a barrier that they have not acknowledged from the conscious level of awareness, from the I know what this is all about, I know shadow work, I know the belief system, into the feeling and understanding of it from a deep, deep unconscious place, from within the body, from within the psyche, from within the soul, getting it and knowing it and creating that deep self-awareness within. Right. And we're not all perfect. I have my flaws. I'm still working through this. But I know more and more it's two parts to the equation. One is understanding it and creating an exercise or a practice where you can explore this within yourself. And then the other is putting it into practice, like actually implementing it and integrating it into your daily life, into your interpersonal relationships, looking at patterns, being self-aware, breaking the patterns within self, healing the body within self, being very mindful of the emotions, being mindful of even how we are projecting onto others and how we are interacting with others in life itself. And if there are areas that have been dimmed, that have been silenced or stuffed with regards to our relationship with our heart, with regards to relationship with source, with our higher self, with life itself, right? So there are many different dynamics to this, and putting it into practice and cultivating the self-awareness within ourselves is crucially important. Like I said, this work opens up levels of consciousness. It allows us to become more aware, more conscious, and more evolved. This moves us into self-actualization. This moves us into advanced consciousness, which was termed by Carl Jung. Okay, so the barriers to this in society are going to be unconscious barriers of shame, unconscious barriers of fear, being ashamed of the past, what has happened. And if very difficult situation has happened in the past, there will be an unconscious barrier that has been built. It could also create a persona where a person would have a very, very difficult time going into the unconscious because of this layer that has been built within the self. And this barrier will be a barrier of shame, creating an outwardly persona or a story that won't allow the person to look within, because of something that happened in the past, or fear, being very afraid of the unknown in a very unconscious way. So our unconscious can influence us in such powerful ways, and I'm sure you have experienced it. I'm sure you have seen it in other people. And it does take a very, very brave soul to do this work. It is quite a process of unraveling. But as I mentioned, the more commitment that we give to shadow work, give to our unconscious, the more free we will be. We will set ourselves free. We will liberate ourselves from what we have been carrying, what we have been harboring, and how we have been operating by unconsciously, our false beliefs. As a recap, shadow work is the exploration into the unconscious self, into areas that we can tend to suppress, deny, avoid, and unconsciously not even realize that is there. The way that we will find out is through observing ourselves, observing our patterns, our feelings, our senses, our thoughts, our relationships, even going into trust. Do I trust myself? Do I trust the universe? What does it feel like to trust? What does it feel like to love? Do I accept myself? Do I love myself? If not, why? Where did it come from? And how can I integrate more self-love and self-acceptance within self? Am I lacking confidence? Am I lacking a strong alignment with self? Where did that come from? What's the origin of it? And how can I implement and integrate more confidence within my functioning, within my belief, and within who I am? And so we can reverse everything. We can reverse, we can alchemize, we can change, we can completely transform ourselves. And then, of course, then that is going to transpire in our reality. We can shift the way we see ourselves. We can shift the way we see the world, and we will connect more with our higher self. We will connect more with our intuition, and we will find more peace within ourselves, alignment within ourselves. And it leads to a very beautiful, beautiful life. So shadow work is the practice of the inner work, understanding the more repressed, suppressed aspects of ourselves. Now, it can come from reading, it can come from journaling, shadow work, it can come from the introspection right? So there are many different exercises and practices that you can do to take you into these areas of yourself. But as I mentioned, this is the most important aspect of ourself that we need to pay attention to more now than ever before. We are in a time where we are slowly seeing the repercussions of, and it's a natural progression. It's a natural unfolding of the evolution of humanity that is happening right now. But I feel that the next 2 generations are going to have a very, very difficult time because of the unconscious, the repercussions of the unconscious suppressed beliefs and emotions and the disconnection from self. And the disconnection from self eventually will catch up, and it will perpetuate greater sicknesses. It will perpetuate greater self-destructive behavior, depression, suicidal ideation, and much more. So we're in for a ride, and the next 2, 3, maybe 4 generations are going to really feel this. But 3, I feel for sure, are going to feel squeezed because of this, because of the detachment from our unconscious, the detachment from our shadow, and the perpetuated cycles from our false belief system that then translates into our body. So we are in a process, and I'm sure if you are watching, listening, then you could very well be in the process of unraveling yourself, returning more into who you truly are, which is a beautiful process. And perhaps maybe in some way you will be able to help others. This is the ripple effect. Once we grasp the true understanding of this work of ourselves, then we can share it with others. We can help others indirectly or directly, even just by being in our light, being whole within ourselves, being at peace within ourselves. It will inspire others. It will uplift others. So it's a beautiful, beautiful selfless practice that will not only, of course, help ourselves and heal ourselves, but create the positive change in this world. Right. And if you are looking for any more guidance into the shadow, I have the Shadow Project. There are, as I record this, 11 modules that are ready to be explored. There are modules for breaking down fear, understanding the shadow aspects and the origins of many different types of fear, of the actors on our stage, the triggers, the subconscious reprogramming, the body, the manifestations within the body. I've broken this down into bite-sized pieces so that you can focus on certain aspects and areas within yourself for incredible transformation and self-actualization, self-mastery. All right. So if you're looking for the deeper work, I have the Shadow Project. You can reach out at any time if you have any questions at all. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Take care.